Your fourth StatLab assignment will be looking at the independent samples t-test, or the two-sample t-test called judging faces. In this assignment, what you'll be doing is looking at targets and judging the likability of that target face using a slider. There are a total of 64 trials. Make sure to read the background and instructions and go through all 64 trials, rating the likability of that target face. Once you've finished all of your trials, you'll of course see the questions and trial by trial data area. The questions area is important for you to understand both the hypotheses and the independent and dependent variable in this study, and you'll need that for your paper, so make sure to pay attention to that section. There's also the formulas, and if you want to calculate by hand in StatLab, you can do that, although all of your statistical work can be done in Microsoft Excel. So you'll want to go to your trial by trial data, and you'll see 4 columns: trial number, age of face, sex of face, and then your likability ratings. For this assignment, the sex of face is irrelevant. You're going to be focusing on the two groups being young faces versus old faces for your t-test. So as in previous assignments, you want to highlight all of your data here and copy it and open a new Excel page and go ahead and press Control-V to paste. If you want, you can delete sex of face just to get that out of the way. I right-click on the column and then just delete it. You could, of course, look at a t-test for that if you want, but we're just focusing on what's required for your paper. The paper will ask you, in terms of descriptive statistics and the visual representation of the t-test, that you include means and standard deviations for your groups. You're familiar now with running means and standard deviations in Excel, but I'll just go through briefly how that works. Make sure to first start by sorting your data. In your data tab here, press the sort button, and then sort by, you want to select age of face, and then press OK. You'll have your data now sorted in terms of the old group and the young group. It's not necessary to sort by likability rating. You can just leave that as is. So the mean, of course, under formulas, insert function, average, and then you want to select the raw data to collect your mean score. So my mean rating was 54.41, and then the standard deviation is, let's see if I have it. Yeah, I have it in my list. By this point, you probably have functions that you've used quite a bit in your list, so you can get your standard deviation by selecting your raw data here. And the standard deviation is 11.87. So you'll want to calculate your means and standard deviations for both the old group and the young group, because you'll need that to report for your paper. Before you actually calculate or run your t-test, you want to make sure to first view that general YouTube video on t-tests in Excel. It'll cover the basics of within subject versus between subject t-tests and how they're run in Excel. Just give you sort of a conceptual idea of t-tests. And you also need to make sure that your Excel is set up with the data analysis tab. If you're in your data tab here, you want to make sure you have this data analysis button in order to run your t-test. If you don't see the data analysis button in Excel, you'll want to go over to File, Options, and under under Add-ins, go to the bottom where it says Manage Excel Add-ins, and then press Go. and make sure that the analysis tool pack is selected. And if that is selected, you'll be able to run your t-test as well as other statistics. Okay, so we're ready to go ahead and run our t-test. Under the data analysis button, you'll see a variety of analyses. You're looking for t-test to sample assuming equal variances. We're going to assume equal variances for this homework assignment. Press OK. It should pop up somewhere. There it is. Let me clear this out. Variable 1 range is the old likability ratings. So go ahead and select your likability ratings for the old group. And variable 2 is the young likability ratings. So you'll want to select that data. Hypothesized mean difference, you'll understand after reading your textbook chapters about one-tailed versus two-tailed t-tests. This is a two-tailed t-test. We don't have any a priori ahead of time prediction which mean should be, whether or not the means scores should be different, so we leave this blank. Alpha of 0.05 is the cutoff for rejection of the null hypothesis. We can go ahead and have this t-test show up in a new workbook. So we go ahead and press OK. These fields will be a little bit scrunched, so you want to expand them a little bit so that you can see all of the information. Again, variable 1 is your old likability ratings. Variable 2 is your your young likability ratings. Those are the average scores. The degrees of freedom is important. You need that to report your t-test. And what you're looking for in this information is you can ignore all of the one-tail information. You want to focus on the two-tail information. And what you see here is the actual t statistic that was calculated and then the probability of that statistic. So if I were to write out this information in terms of the t-test, the notation is lowercase italics t, and then you want to include your degrees of freedom. DF stands for degrees of freedom. And then you want to include the actual t statistic rounded to 2 places. So this is 1.35. And then you report the probability value, which is symbolized with lowercase italicized p. And in my case, the two-tailed probability value was 0.18. If I can get rid of the italics, there we go. Okay, so that's the actual result of my t-test. In terms of interpretation of the t-test, we know that our alpha level is 0.05. So any p-value, probability value that is greater than 0.05 means we do not reject the null hypothesis. Any p-value less than 0.05 means we do reject the null hypothesis. So in my case, the t-test is saying that these two means are not significantly different. Your data, of course, is different than mine. You may actually have a p-value less than 0.05. And one note I'll make about p-values or probability values in Excel is for very small numbers, Excel uses what's called scientific notation. Let me provide you with an example. So if you were to see a p-value of something like this, this is scientific notation for a very small number. What it actually is 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 8, 5. That's the actual probability value. So the rule of thumb with looking at probability values in Excel is if you see this E for scientific notation, you know that the number is extremely small. which would mean you would reject the null hypothesis in that case. That's just sort of shorthand for you to remember, is if you see an E, it's a small number. Conventionally, what we do in terms of reporting small values like that is we usually only go out to about 3 decimal places. So that would be reported as less than 001. Let's see, what other notes do I want to cover? Let's go ahead and take a look at the assignment itself and the elements that are involved in the assignment in terms of your write-up. As in previous assignments, you'll want to introduce the reader to the research in terms of the purpose of the exercise, some brief notes on procedure and data collected, identifying the independent and dependent variables, and the prediction. That will all come from your background reading in the StatLab assignment itself. Visual representations of the data ask you to provide a APA formatted table with the means, standard deviations, and results of the t-test. I've created a recommended table here. Your instructor may request a different format or different information in the table. But if you want to sort of look at this table and pause the video, you'll see here that I've already set up the table as I would create it in terms of the group, the sample size per group, or in this case, number of trials, the mean score, the standard deviation score, the t-value, and then the probability value that you will get from your output. I also made a little note here. It's a good form when you're creating tables for papers that you provide some context for what the reader is looking at. So I just made a note here about, what the participants were doing and how the variables were measured. And that just provides the reader with some context. So yeah, that's how you will create your visual representation. And then finally, your lab results asks you to basically translate that table into, plain language, basically. So you'll want to then provide your means and standard deviations for your two groups. You want to also follow proper APA formatting in terms of reporting a t-test. You'll see that in your textbook, although you're not required to calculate and report effect size Cohen's d for this assignment. And then the final piece of your paper is analyzing whether or not you should or should not reject the null hypothesis in terms of, you're translating your probability value and making an interpretation. So if you have any questions at this point, please reach out to your instructor. Thanks.